Eric Clapton was born on March 30, 1945, in a town called Ripley in Surrey, England. He grew up in a really confusing family situation. For most of his childhood, Eric thought his grandparents were actually his mom and dad, and he believed his real mother was his older sister. When he found out the truth, it really hurt him and affected how he showed his feelings through music. When Eric was young, he fell in love with playing the guitar. He listened to blues music all the time from amazing artists like Robert Johnson, Muddy Waters, and B.B. King. These musicians didn't just teach him how to play, they helped him become an artist who mixed American blues music with British rock and roll. Eric first became famous in the early 1960s when he joined a band called the Yardbirds. This group was leading the way in bringing blues music to Britain. Even though the Yardbirds became really popular and successful, Eric left the band in 1965. He quit because he felt like they were moving away from real blues music just to make more money and become more popular. Eric cared more about playing authentic music than being rich and famous, and this became something he was known for throughout his whole career. After he left the Yardbirds, Eric joined another group called John Mayall and the Bluesbreakers. That's where people started calling him Slow Hand, and everyone realized he was an incredibly talented blues guitar player with amazing skill, feeling, and technical ability. In 1966, Eric helped start a legendary band called Cream with two other musicians named Jack Bruce and Ginger Baker. With Cream, Eric did things with rock music that had never been done before. They mixed improvisation, making up music as they played, heavy blues sounds, and psychedelic music into something totally new and exciting. Songs like Sunshine of Your Love and White Room showed off Eric's incredible guitar solos and proved he was becoming more confident as both a player and a performer. Even though Cream only stayed together for 2 years because the band members didn't get along and had different ideas about music, those 2 years made Eric a worldwide rock star and one of the first real guitar heroes. After Cream broke up, Eric formed another supergroup called Blind Faith with Steve Winwood, Ginger Baker, and Rick Gretsch. Blind Faith only made one album, but it had some songs that people still love today, like Can't Find My Way Home. This short project showed that Eric was always looking for new sounds and deeper ways to express himself through music. He also worked with other artists like Delaney and Bonnie, and later a band called Derek and the Dominoes. In 1970, Derek and the Dominoes made an album called Layla and Other Assorted Love Songs, which became one of the greatest rock albums ever made. The main song on that album, Layla, was written because Eric was in love with a woman he couldn't have, Pattie Boyd, who was married to his friend George Harrison. Layla became one of the most famous love songs ever written, known for its powerful guitar playing and raw emotion. Even though Eric's music career was going great, his personal life was really hard because he struggled with addiction. During the 1970s, he became addicted to heroin and later to alcohol. These addictions almost destroyed his life and his career. But Eric never gave up, and with help from his friends, he eventually beat these addictions. His recovery gave him strength and inspired other people who were facing the same kinds of problems. The fact that Eric was honest about his struggles made people see him as more than just a guitar god. They saw he was a regular human being fighting his own private battles. Eric's career in the 1980s and the years after that was full of both new kinds of music and terrible personal tragedy. He suffered an enormous loss when his 4-year-old son, Connor, died in a tragic accident in 1991. From that terrible heartbreak, Eric wrote Tears in Heaven, which became one of his most beautiful and loved songs. Millions of people connected with its gentle tune and heartbreaking words. This song wasn't just a way to remember his son, it also touched countless people who had experienced grief and loss in their own lives. It proved that Eric wasn't just a master guitar player, but also someone who could tell deeply human stories through his music. Over the years, Eric has worked with an incredible number of legendary musicians, including George Harrison, Bob Dylan, J.J. Cale, and B.B. King. He was so versatile that he could easily play blues, rock, pop, and even reggae music, like when he covered Bob Marley's I Shot the Sheriff. Being able to play so many different kinds of music kept his work fresh and interesting for people of all ages, while his love of blues music gave everything he played a realness that very few musicians could match. Eric Clapton's personal life has always been deeply connected to his music and to the people who were closest to him. One of the most important friendships and love stories in his life started in the late 1960s when he became close friends with George Harrison from the Beatles. Their friendship wasn't just casual hanging out, it was based on both of them really respecting and admiring each other's musical talent. Eric was invited into George's world, playing guitar on Beatles songs like While My Guitar Gently Weeps. The two of them would spend long hours sharing ideas, trying out new sounds, and working together in ways that helped both of them become more creative. But underneath all that friendship and artistic connection, Eric was dealing with a very personal problem. He had fallen in love with George's wife, Pattie Boyd, who was an English model and muse. Pattie had already inspired George to write his famous love song, Something. Eric's feelings for Pattie became a source of both passion and pain for him. His love for her, even though she didn't love him back the same way, drove him to write some of his most iconic music, including the deeply emotional song Layla, which showed his suffering and desire. The situation eventually changed years later when George and Pattie's marriage fell apart, and they got divorced in 1977. Once Pattie was free from her marriage to George, she and Eric finally made their long and complicated relationship official. On March 27, 1979, in Tucson, Arizona, the couple got married. To many people, this seemed like the end of a years-long love triangle that had fascinated fans and the media. For Eric, who had fought through addiction and the pain of longing for Pattie, the marriage felt like both a personal victory and a fresh start. However, married life wasn't easy. Eric and Pattie really wanted to start a family, but they faced heartbreaking difficulties. Even though they desperately wanted children, Pattie had several miscarriages, and they even tried using medical science to help. In 1984, they tried in vitro fertilization, which back then was still pretty new and emotionally draining. Sadly, these attempts also failed, leaving both Eric and Pattie devastated. The weight of not being able to have children put a huge strain on their marriage. During this difficult time, Eric made choices that would have serious consequences. He started an affair with an Italian model and actress named Lori Del Santo. From this relationship, a son was born. Connor Clapton was born on August 21, 1986, and he brought joy to Eric's complicated personal life. However, Connor's birth also delivered a crushing blow to Eric's marriage. When Pattie found out about Eric's affair and that he had a child with Lori, she was absolutely devastated. The betrayal was too much to overcome, and their marriage collapsed under the pressure. By 1989, Pattie and Eric got divorced, ending a marriage that had once been celebrated as the conclusion of one of rock music's most famous love stories. The tragedy in Eric's life got even worse with the shocking and terrible death of his young son, Connor. On March 20, 1991, when he was just 4 years old, Connor fell from an open bedroom window on the 53rd floor of a Manhattan apartment building. It was a devastating accident that left Eric grief-stricken beyond words. This loss became a defining moment in his life and changed both his music and his personal outlook forever. From this enormous pain, Eric poured his grief into one of the most moving songs of his career, Tears in Heaven. It was a heartfelt song that expressed both the sorrow of a grieving father and the hope that he might see his son again in the afterlife. The song resonated with millions of people and became one of his most enduring works, a universal song about loss and healing. Years later, after going through so much heartbreak, Eric found love again. In 1998, when he was 53 years old, he met Melia McHenry, who was a 22-year-old administrative assistant. They met at a party in Columbus, Ohio, after one of his performances. Their connection started out quiet and low-key, with the couple dating privately for a year before telling the public about their relationship in 1999. Unlike Eric's earlier high-profile romances that were often filled with drama and public attention, this relationship brought him stability and peace. On January 1, 2002, they got married in a small ceremony at St. Mary Magdalene Church in Ripley, the very same village where Eric had been born. This tied his new chapter of life back to his roots. Together they built the family Eric had always wanted, raising 3 daughters who brought him joy and stability after years of turmoil, loss, and change. At 80 years old, Eric Clapton has lived a life that very few musicians could ever imagine. It's been filled with extraordinary achievements, painful struggles, and legendary friendships. One of the most fascinating and lasting connections in his story is the bond he shared with George Harrison from the Beatles. For decades, fans and people who write biographies have wondered about the nature of their friendship, their rivalry, and the complicated love triangle involving George's wife, Pattie Boyd. Now that he's older, Eric has finally spoken openly about it, thinking back on how deep that relationship was and revealing truths that he kept private for most of his career. Eric described George not only as a bandmate during the times when their musical worlds overlapped, but as a kindred spirit, someone very much like himself. George was more than just a friend, Eric admitted. He was like a brother to me, but at the same time there was always this unspoken competition between us. Both men were guitarists with extraordinary ability, though they had very different styles. Eric was fiery, passionate, and driven by blues music, while George was melodic, subtle, and influenced by spirituality. Despite those differences, their respect for one another was unmistakable and clear. Eric remembered late-night jam sessions at George's home where the two would trade guitar licks, laugh at their mistakes, and encourage each other to keep pushing forward and improving. But their friendship wasn't always smooth. The biggest strain came when Eric fell deeply in love with Pattie Boyd, George's wife. It was an open secret among rock musicians, and Eric never fully denied it. "I couldn't help how I felt," Eric said. "I loved her with everything I had, and I think George knew it long before anyone else did." What might have destroyed a weaker friendship somehow turned into one of the strangest and most enduring bonds in music history. Eric poured his obsession and longing into his music, writing songs like Layla that became anthems of heartbreak and desire. Meanwhile, George, though he was hurt, never fully turned away from Eric. Eric admitted that he has carried guilt for many years over how the situation played out. "George was hurt, and I knew it," he confessed. "But the incredible thing about him was that he forgave me. He was the most forgiving man I've ever known." Indeed, George's generosity of spirit became a cornerstone of their relationship, one of the most important parts of it. Even after Pattie left George and later married Eric, the two men continued to perform together, appearing side by side on stage as if nothing had changed. To people watching from the outside, it seemed almost impossible, but to them, music was always the bridge that repaired whatever wounds life inflicted. Eric revealed that the quiet strength of their friendship became even more evident in later years, especially when George was battling illness. "When George was sick, I visited him as often as I could," Eric recalled softly. "We didn't even have to talk much. Sometimes we'd just sit together, and the silence said more than words ever could." George's death in 2001 was a crushing blow for Eric, who organized the Concert for George the following year as a tribute to his friend's life and legacy. That concert, filled with music, laughter, and reverence, became one of Eric's proudest achievements. Looking back now, Eric admits that his relationship with George shaped him more than almost any other. "I've played with so many great musicians in my life," Eric said. "But George was special. He wasn't trying to outplay you or prove anything. He was just trying to make something beautiful. That taught me a lot about what music is really for." At 80, Eric speaks about George with a tenderness that reveals how much the friendship still means to him. Gone are the layers of bravado, rivalry, and the complications of love. In their place is a simple truth that Eric carries with him, that despite everything, the jealousy, the heartbreak, the fame, and the passing years, George Harrison was and always will be one of the greatest friends he ever had. "George had this light about him," Eric said. "Even when things were dark, he carried peace with him. I miss him every day. And the truth is, I'll never stop missing him."